Hey everyone, we're back here in Unity, and today we're going to be focusing on destroying our enemy game object, and we're going to be doing that through shots. So the first thing we want to set up is a destruction animation, and I'll leave you to sort that out because we've talked about and we've gone through animation so many times that it's not really worth me showing the process of making an animation. But in case you were curious, that's my explosion death animation for my enemy, and that's going to show us visually that we've destroyed the enemy. Now there's a couple of other things that can help us recognize if we're attacking or destroying the enemy, and those components go under the UI. So we're going to be working with some UI components, tying a health bar to our enemy game object and tying that all together with a couple of scripts. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the hierarchy, right click, go to UI, and then we'll go to canvas. And so we can take a look at our canvas in a better way just by hitting F while we're hovering the scene view. And you can see that the canvas is very big. I can't really change that right now, and that's because of the render mode. So I go over to canvas here, render mode, and then we select world space. This will allow us to tie this to our enemy idle so that the health bar will follow our enemy around. It also helps us to scale things down because this is massive right now. Before we scale it down, we're going to go to canvas again, right click on it, then UI and slider. And then we're going to get rid of this thing that is a child of our slider. It's called handle slide area. We don't need that. And we'll just take a look at our slider. That's a pretty good slider. Now what we want to do is we want to scale down our canvas because right now it's massive and we don't need it to be massive. So I'm going to go to scale here and I'm just going to start scaling it down. And then scale it down a little bit more. Okay, once you've scaled down your canvas, you'll recognize that your slider is now tiny. But in reality, it's actually just about the perfect size. So we're going to zoom in and see how that is in comparison to our enemy game object. And so it's still pretty big, honestly. I don't need to scale it down anymore. I think I've scaled it enough, but I'll mess around with this positioning here of our box. So I'll bring this in like this, just so we have a tight box around our slider. This isn't going to change the size of the slider like we've already seen with scaling it down, but it will allow us to just make things a little bit cleaner. And so I can imagine my component being just around about there. If I scale it down just a little bit more, won't really let me, it's kind of at its limit there. But what I can do is I can then go to the slider here and I can continue to scale it down. So I'd like it to be about that wide, so 0.65. I think we'll go with 0.65 again. Okay, so that sits pretty nicely above our enemy game object there, but it's still not tied to our enemy game object, and we're not going to do that quite yet. There's a couple of things that we need to do to our slider and with our canvas. So I'm going to go to canvas again, and then we'll go to reference pixels per unit, and I'm going to change this to 10. This is going to give us more of a blocky effect. If I change it to 50, it'll round up the edges, and I think actually I'm going to stick to 50 just because it looks a little nicer. I can go over to my slider again, scale things down a little bit, and that looks about right to me. So go 0.45 because I just like numbers that I can round up. And then continuing with our slider, we'll go to transition. We don't want any transition stuff, so we'll just go to none for that. And then we're going to set the max value to 10 because that's the amount of HP we're going to give to our enemy. Gonna check that this slider works properly, and what we can see here is that it doesn't quite make it to the edge. So what we want to do is we're going to adjust the fill area. So if we click on here, we can see why it's doing that. It's because it doesn't quite match up with the background that we have. So with the fill area, I just drag this along, not too far, and then I go back to my slider, take a look, and that's pretty good. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is mess around with the colors a little bit, decorate this. So we have a background and we have a foreground. Our fill is our foreground, our background is our background. We'll change the value on the slider, going over to the slider again, and then we'll mess around with the background. The background, I want to have it match the purple that we have here, but I'm just going to gray it out a little bit so it's not as prominent, and then we can close that. And the fill, similarly, I want it to represent the character again, so I'm going to go for that red, turn it into a nice kind of vermilion, and then close that. We'll go over to the slider again, shift things around, and it still looks pretty good. So we've worked out our slider. This is our UI component. The last thing we want to do for it is make it a child of our enemy idol, and that's as simple as just dragging it over to our enemy idol. So you've seen that I can manipulate the value on the slider, and that shows us, I guess, a different fill. And what we want to do next is we want to tie this together to a script, because we're not going to be adjusting the health bar ourselves, but we want a script that will adjust the health bar and give us an accurate representation of how much damage the enemy has taken. We need a couple of scripts to do this. The first one we'll be looking at is going to be attached to our shots. But before we go there, we're just going to make some final adjustments. So in terms of the position for my health bar, I'm just going to have it at 0 there. And this is while I have it as a child to my character, and I'll just make it 1 there, so it floats nicely and directly above. We can do a test run to see what it will look like in the game. Okay, so we have our character moving around, or our enemy rather, and it looks pretty good. So the health bar is following our enemy, discreet, it's not too massive, and so we can continue on with the shots. Let's go to the scripts, and then we'll go to enemy destruction. Here we have the script that's going to be tied to our shots. It references the enemy health script because it's going to work with that script to just kind of not calculate but subtract health away from our enemy when we attach that script to them. But really what this does is it says, okay, I have an attack damage and I'm seeking out any objects with this tag attached to them. And if they have the tag enemy, then I'm going to access the enemy health script of that game object, and I'm going to subtract 1 from the health that it started off with, and then I'm going to destroy myself, so I disappear out of the scene, so we don't have, like, you know, a 10 hit combo and just kill our enemy immediately. Our enemy isn't going to be destroyed by this because we're going to be having them die via animation and due to a loss of health completely, so we don't want to destroy our enemy game object on collision, just the game object that this is tied to, which is the shot. The process to tie the script to our shots is very simple. We just go over to our shots right here, and you can see that I've already attached it. But what you'll do is you'll just simply go to your script folder, or you'll go to add component, and then you can go to scripts, and then find the script that you want to add. So you can go to enemy health, or you can drag it in onto the prefab if it's in the hierarchy here. So right now our attack damage is set to 1, and that's the only thing that we need to deal with for our shot. So that's all sorted. We know that our shot moves through the air and it moves at certain angles and everything like that. That's things we've dealt with in other scripts, so we don't have to worry about this any further. Now we need to deal with our enemy health. So our enemy health script is a tad bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So the first thing we're going to do is reference that we're going to be using UnityEngine.ui. That's not something that we see on our other scripts. but because we'll be using the UI, we need this. And you can actually see the public classes when you look at the script in the inspector, so it needs a slider, and we're going to drag our slider in for that very purpose. So it says we have a starting health of 100, and we have a current health which just continues on, and it just, registers, okay, what is your health at this point, what is your health at this point, and it just lets us know. And we've set up a reference to the animator because we want a death animation, and so the current health will equal the starting health when the game starts. So whatever we set as the starting health, which we're going to change from 100 to 10, is going to remain as the current health until we change that by shooting our enemies. And here we set up the consequences for losing health completely. So when health is less than 0, then we go into a state called death. And this death state means that we set a trigger for our animation, which is die, and that's going to be a trigger that we'll be setting through the animator. And then we're going to destroy the game object, but we're not going to destroy it immediately. We're going to delay that by a few seconds so we can see our destruction animation play out. Now, depending on how long your destruction animation is, you'll need to change these units here. You just have to keep the F there, but you'll need to change those numbers. So what I can do is I can go over to my enemy and go to add component, scripts, and then enemy health. And so our enemy now has health. We don't need to do anything with the current health, but we do need to play around with the animator a little bit. So we're going to go to our animator window whilst we have our enemy game object selected. So we're in the animator here. We're in parameters, hit plus, and remember it said trigger? Well, we're going to make a new trigger, and it's going to be called die. And in here, we already have our enemy blow up animation. And what we want is from any state, we want our death animation to play if the right circumstances are met. So I make a transition from any state. And then with that transition, I right click, I go to list. So we don't want alert, but we want die. And so if this trigger, die, becomes true, then we'll go into this enemy blow up, and there'll be a delay of a few seconds, not for the animation, but for our enemy actually leaving the game. And then our enemy will be destroyed, and it's as simple as that. And we can test this out, we can run this, we can see if it's actually working. But there's just one final thing that we need to do, and that's to add a tag. Now tags are similar to layers, and we're going to use them in a similar way. Whilst I'm on my enemy, I'm going to go to this tag drop down and then select enemy. Now I added this tag myself, and you can do that just by doing that, but I don't need to add any more tags. So we'll go back to our enemy, and then they have the tag. So the collider fits and everything, and it's going to register it right. Then the next thing we want to do on our enemy idle is to take our slider and turn it into our health bar. So health slider, we just drag this component in, and there we have it. We have our health slider. So I just jump across. I'm going to sit here and snipe this, and we can already see when I shoot the enemy, their health goes down, keeps going down, keeps going down. They're in the alert phase right now, and then the animation plays out. Maybe we need to tweak the length of the animation, but that seems pretty good, and that's a good place to stop today. Thank you very much. We're going to be punching out episodes pretty soon, continuing with this series. Feel free to leave your opinion in the section below. Subscribe if you'd like to continue this series, and I'll be seeing you all very soon.